You're watching Newsfeed AM. Let's get on to this conversation now. And coalition governments will be a total disaster for South Africa. This is the view of ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa delivering the January 8th statement over the weekend. Ramaphosa says the ANC is gunning for outright majority, despite a number of polls predicting that the ANC will drop to below 50% in this year's elections. A number of coalition governments, especially in the metros, have been dysfunctional, leading to chaos in councils and, in particular, on service delivery. So, will this country avoid coalition governments at a national level? Let's try and understand what the implications of this might be. And we speak now to research fellow at the University of the Free State, Dr. Harlan Cloete, who talks to us from Cape Town this morning. Dr. Cloete, thank you very much for your time. President Cyril Ramaphosa has to say that his party is gunning for outright majority, because if the ANC were to be brought below 50%, it'll be for the first time since the dawn of democracy. So he has to say that. But is he correct, though, on the score of coalition governments being a total disaster for the country?
Good morning, Polly, and good morning also to the viewers. That is the president's opinion. But if we look at the facts, if we look at the evidence in front of us, then the coalition governments have not been very stable. They haven't been good for service delivery. If we look at what has happened in Johannesburg, and there are so many other examples, then we do not have a track record of good coalition governments, and governance for that matter. So it is still early days. I think we are getting used to this, but that they have been a major cause of instability at local government is a fact. Yeah.
Let's take a listen to the president of the ANC, Dr. Cloete, and we're going to come back to this conversation in a moment. There is a specific soundbite I'd like for you, the viewer, to listen to on the score of coalition governments.
We are working and going to work for a clear victory. When they look at us, but iphelile ANC. When they look at us, but we are going to get less than 50%. Abanye bathi we are even going to get 30%. Lokho kukhulunywa ngabantu abangasazi, abangayazi ANC kaLuthuli, ANC kaMandela, ANC akaJohn Langalebale Dube, sethi wozani nizosithola kahle.
Dr. Cloete, President Ramaphosa there saying that, well, let's see what you have to show, but we are ready for you. Can I ask the question on the score of the ANC's governance record? Is the party really sure of itself when it comes to that? Because my sense is that that is what is going to become its undoing, the governance track record.
Look, if we look at the governance track record, one yardstick for that is the National Development Plan review that was done in November, I think, last year. And there's a clear admittance by the government that we have failed in terms of our economic policy, in terms of social cohesion, and our track record at the municipality. So the governance track record of the ANC does not look very rosy. And so a boxer gets into the ring to win. And so what the president said over the weekend of the January 8th statement was expected. The ANC is expecting to win. It cannot go into the ring saying that we are not going to get a majority. And so every political party, power is the currency of a political party. They go into it to win it. And ideally you would want to win forthright so that you can govern without having to look for partners. And so whether the ANC, and like the president says, that every political party will have to work very hard, because they're also facing an electorate who have become disillusioned every time there's load shedding, it sends a message to the brain of, what the heck? What is happening? Why can't we just keep the lights on? And so it is that they'll have to convince, especially young South Africans, to come out and vote. So what the ANC said over the weekend was to be expected. They want to win outright so that they continue governing this country.
But opinion polls aside, Dr. Cloete, is there, yes, the ANC publicly may say one thing, and it is exactly what its president has had to say over the weekend, and that is that they're going to get into this election with the intention of getting an outright majority. However, is what they are not communicating, though, also to be factored in? In fact, might it inject a little bit of reality here? What am I talking about? Deputy President Paul Mashatile has been leading efforts specifically on the question of coalitions. We know that the main opposition, Democratic Alliance, also has what it has been pushing as the Moonshot Pact with fellow opposition parties. Realistically, Dr. Cloete, does that give us signals that, yes, the ANC may go into this election saying, we're confident we're going to get a majority here. However, there is reality from their end that they might actually be forced into a coalition. And if it does go there, who is the likely partner?
Yeah, I think there are many schools of thought. The ANC, like you rightly say, the ANC have under parliamentary team have taken missions abroad, knowledge-sharing missions to Denmark in particular, where they looked at coalition governance. So I think on the one side, there is this buoyance of we are going to win outright, but there's also the reality check, like you rightly said, where Deputy President is leading the coalition and to try and even look at legislation, to look at how do you ensure better stability at local government, because in the end it's the people, the electorate that are suffering because of the instability with the local government elections. Now, imagine you have a ANC winning a national parliament, or they have a parliamentary majority, but then we have different provinces being governed by different coalitions, and the tension that may cause. You've seen, for example, in the past, the tension where the ANC does not govern, for example, in the Western Cape, that sometimes there's, not sometimes, maybe all the time, there's tension between the allocation of resources, the different pronouncement by different ministers. For example, in the Western Cape, MECs are called ministers, and so that in itself creates a bit of tension. Now, you are going to have that scenario playing out. Different coalitions, because we've got provincial legislatures, and so that is the one. On your other question about who favors, I think there's two schools of thought within the ANC. The Veterans League preferring a coalition of the two biggest losers, because the ANC and the ANC in all likelihood would still be the majority party. Whether they will get 50%, that's another question. And so it looks like the DA will be a close second now as the official opposition. So there's one school of thought saying that the ANC should get into bed with the DA.
Yeah.
The other saying, no, let's rather get into bed with the EFF, and then complete the democratic revolution as it were. Yeah. And so it is those internal tensions within the ANC as to who to get into bed with. Are we going to have minority governments? In other words, the ANC still gets, say, 45%, but the DA, with their coalition partners, managed to get us over 50% plus one, and you have a minority government. And so, if we look at local government, I am on record as saying after the local government elections that if we want stable government, then the ANC and the DA should iron out their differences, put their egos aside, and say, well, how do we govern in the best interest of South Africans? Because what we've seen in local government is that the smaller parties often first look at what they can get in terms of positions, about jobs, there are other variables that come to play and not necessarily service delivery and the interest of the people.
Yeah.
So I think we are in for a very interesting ride over the next 12 months as we build up, and we must not forget that as we build up to 2026, which is the local government elections. The last one we saw jump from about 27 coalitions to plus minus 60. I think the 2026 elections will produce even more coalitions. And so coalitions are here to stay.
Dr. Cloete, I have just one more question on the question of coalitions before we move on to another pressing question. Maturity becomes a key word here, political maturity. So if you are, as I hear you say, strongly suggesting that for a stable government in South Africa, should the ANC be brought under 50%, it has to partner with the Democratic Alliance. However, ideological differences, and sometimes some people will say, what is this thing that you constantly talk about, ideological differences? Let's just put it plainly. The ANC-led government recently has gone to the International Court of Justice to say what's going on in Gaza is a genocide. The DA, on the other hand, has fired a shadow minister in its shadow cabinet who came out very early on and said, what is going on in Gaza is a genocide. And they said, no, you are speaking out of turn. And for that, we're going to fire you. Look at what they've done recently. There is an under-19 captain, cricket captain, who has pledged his support for the Israeli Defense Force. He's now been removed as captain of the under-19 cricket. The DA is saying, we demand his immediate reinstatement. That paints a picture for you of where these parties sit ideologically. Would they be able to exercise that maturity?
I am not sure. We have not seen that level of maturity. If we just take Joburg as an example, we have not seen political maturity, where political parties are committed to putting their purpose together and leaving egos at the door. Do they have that? That is what the electorate want. The electorate are saying that we are not trusting you with our majority. Find a way to work together. Now, I understand fully the international geopolitical issues, but I think what South Africans want after 30 years of democracy, what are your policies when it comes to poverty, unemployment, and inequality? Let me just take one, for example, education. Education. Nelson Mandela said, if you want to change the world, it is through education. And now quality education still escapes the majority of South Africans. We have really messed up education. And so the consensus, I think, is what do we do about the pressing domestic issues? I understand the issues of Gaza and Palestine and Israel. What are the issues locally? How do we get an economy that is more inclusive, that includes more black people into the center? Because we have become a society of elites, where the elites, this South Africa is a beautiful space for the elites. And the politicians, by the way, also fall that. And so there's almost a compact amongst the elites to keep them in power at the expense of the majority. And so unemployment, I think the electorate, there is also a theory that says that coalition governments will now be everything. And everything will happen and everything will get right once we have coalition governments in place. I think South Africans must not be naive. What we need is strong civil society organizations who also understand their political role, that can hold government to account. We have not seen that in the last 30 years. And so we've had progress, like the president said, yes, and we cannot deny that South Africa looks completely different to what it looked like before 1994. I think that the quality of our democracy, the quality of the services, the quality of the houses that was built, if we just ring fence or focus on education, I think that's one of our biggest tragedies.
Well, you've actually hit the nail on the head, Dr. Cloete, because that's the question I wanted to conclude this conversation on, because we are in a period of economic difficulty. You have so many graduates that sit at home having qualified from university. Just today, we're going to be hearing yet another batch of matriculants who have probably passed with very, very good marks, who are going to be sent to university. What happens when they come out of university? It is where the ANC's, again, governance record comes into question. Have they built a solid enough workforce that is of quality, but also that talks to the skills that industry in South Africa is desperate for? Can they be judged just on that score of producing quality graduates?
Like I said, in the space of education, I think that has been our biggest shortcoming. We've got a lack of social solidarity in this country. There was a body that I'm not quite sure what happened with NEDLAC, which was the consensus between business, government, and community, and labor as to where we should be heading towards. And so what we have seen is that a sluggish economy. We are not producing enough graduates. Access to quality education still escapes millions. There are millions of young people roaming the streets. That we've got a very high dropout rate, for example. And so, we almost need a rethink on our education system and the skills and the quality of graduates that we are producing. There's a huge disjuncture between what universities teach and the reality in the marketplace. And so we also need a rethink on the education field. The reality is that the majority of young people in former Model C schools will probably end up accessing tertiary education, whereas the majority of the young people in the township schools will not be able to access tertiary education and become statistics and become a burden on the health system, etc., etc. And then we have that coupled with teenage pregnancies. There's almost a hopelessness amongst young people when it comes to employment and getting dignity back. And I think for me, to be able to work, to be able to be a productive citizen is what matters. If a person who doesn't work, he can't feel good about himself, and society treats you like that as well.
Sure.
And so education is the cornerstone of our society, and we must do whatever it takes to make sure that young people access that. But now we have NSFAS scandals, for the last 18 months, NSFAS that is supposed to be this financial aid scheme. There are some huge governance question marks even around that, which is so depressing.
Yeah.
Given that education is a pathway out of poverty.